you don't have to stick to 30, 60, 90, but it's those sort of 3 phases. Shut up and listen, make some observations, and then make some changes.
But the reality is, for any good salesperson, is the CEO of their territory, the CEO of their deal.
100%.
And they have to bring everybody else around them and allow those people who are great at what they do own those particular pieces of delivery. Each one of these changes needs a plan. If you want everyone on the same page, there better damn well be a page.
Yeah.
And that's for yourself as much as it is for everybody else. Welcome to GrowthPulse, the B2B Sales Podcast, where we take a deep dive in the world of business-to-business sales and how you can get the most out of your investments in sales people, sales systems and processes, the lifeblood of any thriving organisation. Join us as we explore a range of topics as well as speak to the industry's thought leaders, vendors, success stories, and people who've both failed and succeeded along the way on their journey in business and sales. Before we get started, please do us a huge favour and click subscribe, follow or like wherever you're watching or listening to us. Also, please drop us a comment that you've subscribed, and please feel free to ask us any questions about the show. We'd love to get to know our audience. In this episode, Daniel and Simon are talking about change. As salespeople, we're masters at helping our customers identify the need for change in their business, but often we aren't so great at looking internally and really mastering change for ourselves. Change is a constant, not a variable in the world of sales. We discuss some tools and practices to help you really strengthen your game when it comes to managing change. So let's jump in. Welcome everyone to GrowthPulse, the B2B podcast. I'm Dan Bartels, one of your hosts, and I'm here joined as usual with Simon Peterson.
Hey Dan, how you doing?
How are you, mate?
Very well.
How's the week been?
Well, it's been an interesting one. I started a new job on Monday, boy, it's an interesting thing. You know, you work for a company for 5-6 years, you get used to the way things operate, and you suddenly move into a completely new ecosystem, new boss, new team. And I got to say, the onboarding experience has been fantastic, but it's been drinking from a fire hose. I've moved, I spent my entire life selling business software, and I'm now very much focused on data protection, security, cybersecurity. So it's a really different game to be in. It's exciting, but it's going to take me a little while to get used to it all. And but I got to say, the people have been pretty wonderful welcoming me in, and it's boy, I've got a lot to learn. Change, right? That's the thing with sales.
Look, I think that's it's a good topic for us to talk on today, which is change, and I think it's interesting. Change is the constant, not the variable, when you work in sales.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've spun up this new podcast. That's a change in our sort of working lives and careers, and we're trying to build this. Whether you've taken on a new role, you've taken a promotion, a new territory, it's just a new financial year or a new quarter, sometimes just a new month. Like, how often are you back to zero starting again? And it's not the monotony. Every cycle in that as a salesperson's change, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think we're as salespeople used to the quarter end or the month end, and every month or every quarter there's a new metric, a new shiny flashy thing that you need to go sell. You need to be across it. There's usually a lot of e-learning you need to do. So I guess being comfortable with change and being comfortable with trying to be an instant expert in a lot of new things is difficult, right? It takes a while to get used to.
I think that's one of the things around being in sales is you're expected to be an expert in so many areas. Yet, I mean, just by definition, you can't be an expert in everything, but you need to be significantly more than competent in most.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, the trick, Dan, is, it's impossible to be an expert. And I think the smarter salespeople learn who's around them, who's been in the business for a while. They get to know their solution engineers. And I think you can't do it by yourself. And I think the best salespeople in 23 know that there are going to be new things coming down the pipeline. And you just need to figure out who in the business or who in your partner network can help you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that I've definitely seen and experienced in my career is the people who succeed the fastest, not always the best, but definitely the fastest, lean on those around them really quickly for advice, for knowledge, for previous experience of how to not make the same mistake again. I mean, how are you approaching stepping into this new role from leaning on others or learning from those around you?
Yeah, so starting a new role, I think the first challenge that I had is first of all to learn who's who in the zoo. There are so many people with different expertise, and a lot of these people that I'm meeting have been in the business for 5, 7, 10 years, and they're awesome people to get to know. And I think my first step was just understanding their personality, how they like to work, and I think being genuinely curious about what they've learned. And I think I've sat down with people not really knowing where the meeting's going to go, where the agenda's going to head, but boy, I'm learning. And I think the more people you can talk to in your first week, the better. The other trick I've learned is keep good notes. And I think when you suddenly, it's like walking into a new organisation. I didn't know anybody. I've got all these names floating around in my head trying to remember who's an expert in what. And it's been really interesting. It's a grounding experience. It probably only happens in your career, every 3 or 4 years, but you've got to get really good at it, and you've got to do it quickly. And I think for me, a big advantage was the new sales organisation I've jumped into uses a lot of the same systems I'm used to. So my CRM system is Salesforce. So first thing I did was downloaded my team's pipeline and then started asking questions. And immediately your sales team goes, oh, this guy really, he's going to get across the business real quick. So you're building credibility, but also being incredibly curious and certainly not jumping to judgment. People have asked me what I want to change. And I said, look, my 30 days are my shut up and listen phase. Last thing I want to do is come in rock the boat before I really understand what's working and what's not working. I mean, you started a big new role.
Are you going through that 30, 60, 90 process? Is that what you're kind of planning going through?
Yeah, mentally I am. Nobody's asked me to, like the good old days where you had to put your PowerPoint together with your 30, 60, 90 on it. Yeah. But, we've been doing this for a while, Dan. So, for me, 30, 60, 90 is probably 3 different themes, right? For me, 30 is seek to understand, be curious, don't be too judgmental. It's a business that's been up and running for years. They're doing a good job. They're ahead of targets, etc. So really shut up and listen for the first 30. And I think, between 30 and 60, you're starting to inspect what's working well, what people have told you that's working well that may not be. Then you're starting to have a point of view. And I think in that, that second phase, it's rather, for me personally, it's not about screaming and yelling and telling people to do things differently. It's, have you thought about doing it this way? Have you thought about doing it that way? And that's where you kind of build on the experience over years that you've done things slightly different in other places, and you challenge the norms, but you do it respectfully. And then I think after that 60 days, you've got a good sense of what's working. You've met the partner community, you know the AEs, you know how pipeline's created, you've built a relationship with marketing, and I guess fundamentally you've met the solution engineers, and so you know what really is working. I think after that sort of 60 days, between 60 and 90, you're heading to the end of your first quarter. You need to start making some changes, and not necessarily just stamping your authority, but really starting to add some value, because, I mean, they've hired you for a reason. They want you to come into the business and, have a new pair of eyes. And that's what I like. And I think also you don't have to stick to 30, 60, 90, but it's those sort of 3 phases. Shut up and listen, make some observations, and then make some changes.
For anybody in a sales role, whether you're leading an account for the first time, you're talking to a new prospect, you've taken on a new role, or you've moved teams, you've moved geographies, whatever it may be. Each one of these changes needs a plan.
It does.
I've harped on to my teams, this idea, and one time I'm going to write a book on this and all the way that it applies. which is, if you want everyone on the same page, there better damn well be a page.
Yeah.
And that's for yourself as much as it is for everybody else.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's so easy for people to I'll start with my 30, 60, 90, but my recollection of what that looks like, 15 days in has changed, and I've modified it to what I'm doing versus what I planned and intended to do. And I think part of that is communicating to the other stakeholders around you. So in the context of a customer, it's communicating, saying, the reason I'm here, or you've asked me to come in here, is to answer these questions for you. We're going to go through this process. We'll deliver on what we promised to do in these phases. Even if it's just in the sale process of, are they going to buy or not buy, or engage with you or not engage?
Yep.
But then internally, it's how am I communicating to those below and above me, or beside me, exactly what it is I'm trying to achieve and what I'm doing, so they're clear on what you're trying to do.
Yep.
I think it's so easy for people to not communicate clearly or assume that everybody else knows what they're doing.
Completely agree.
And assumption makes an ass out of you and me, as the adage goes. And I think we all assume way too much. Or you assume that everyone understands what's going on, where we're going, and how we're going to go about doing it. And when people document it, and that's really the core of what a CRM is. Mm-hmm. It's the documentation and the clarity around what it is, where's your deal at?
Yeah.
Where are you taking this day, week, month, quarter, year, whatever it may be? But then how am I going to plan to succeed, but also plan to recognize when to exit as well?
Yep.
Back in your context of taking on a new role, I built a 30, 60, 90. Like, where's your checkpoints? Mm. Where's the points where what you'd plan to achieve isn't working? And hey, I need some help here.
Yep.
I know that I need to do these 5 things, or be enabled better on product or your systems. And hey, I've never used your CRM or marketing tool before. I'm going to need more training than less.
Yep.
I think all those things come into like building the plan.
And I think, Dan, I mean, you're an expert at this, but getting everybody on the same page, building the page, it's not about building the page and moving on. I think looking at what was on the page on day 1 versus day 20 or 30 is going to be radically different.
Yeah, and I've had this argument with different people over enormous number of roles and projects. There's no template to the page. The page is actually a process, not a thing that you fill out. Because, and just take the context of a sale. If I'm selling, I don't know, I'm selling cars, or I'm selling houses, or I'm selling software, yes, the product is the same, but the way that the customer is going to use it, therefore the way that you deliver it, is going to be different.
Yep.
The benefits for each of those stakeholders is different because the price changes, or the delivery changes, or the use case changes. So therefore the way that you need to talk about it and think about the context of it will be different. Mm-hmm. Even sometimes where you have to communicate it will be different.
Yep.
If you deal with, and I've dealt with CEOs who are practically illiterate before, this is not a criticism, they just aren't people that are high readers and have built great businesses by not reading and delegating that to others. So you need to sell physically to them. You need to be in a room and show them. Mm-hmm. Producing 10 volumes of PowerPoint presentations or documentation to read isn't relevant for them. No. Or if you're selling to, I've sold to legal firms before, so lawyers like to read. Mm-hmm. They don't like you to bamboozle them. They want to read the documentation. So here are 2 people who you're trying to sell the same outcome to, the same product, who need to go about it completely different. So the plan changes.
Yep. Know your audience.
And I think that's a really key piece. Know your audience. Like, delve into the detail and understand what your audience requires. It's also understanding that the team you're working within, and everybody has a team. Even if you're a solopreneur trying to kind of grow your business, you've got an accountant, or you've got some people that are suppliers to you, or some support structures that team changes over time.
Yep.
But how do they work? Yep. Because again, if you're bringing in people who aren't very technical or aren't computer literate, but they're great at their job.
Yep.
and you want to drive everything via an online spreadsheet, well, that just practically isn't going to work.
Yeah.
So how do you make those changes?
One of the big changes I'm trying to grapple with is most of my career has been in direct sales. So my sales team, I inspect the deals, ask them their next steps. Have you empathized with your customer? Do you know the problem you're trying to solve, et cetera, all the normal good stuff that you do in direct sales. And I've moved into a new role where it's 100% channel. So it's a very different way of inspecting a deal. But what I've learned in the first few days is I still need to inspect the deals. I need to hold my salespeople to account. I want my salespeople to meet the end customer, but there are a lot more stakeholders involved. So that's a big change. It's going to be interesting to understand how that works. And I think as you move through your career, it's fantastic to throw yourself in the deep end of different models, different ways of doing things. Because I think as you get older, it's great to draw on some of my direct sales experience as I start potentially making changes to how you might do a pure play channel kind of sales inspection and leading a team. So it's a fascinating thing to change. But I think back to your point about the 30, 60, 90 or a plan on a page, how many times in your career, probably happened to me early on in my sales career more, but I'd get my new boss, he'd ask me to build the plan, I'd build the plan, and we'd never go back and look at it again. The day I sent it to him was probably the last day either of us ever looked at it.
People need to think about how do they operationalize and use a plan. A plan is not just a general can't build a plan, send the soldiers out, and then they never refer back to it because it's going to live. It's going to live while the battle goes on.
Yep.
And in order to coordinate all the troops, he has to continually ensure that, or he or she has to continually ensure that everybody is updated on what the variations are and how we're going about it.
Yep.
And I think this is where, in again a sales context, we try to use things like playbooks or territory plans or go-to-market strategies to try and communicate these different bits and pieces to a sales team. But I think the challenge that everybody runs into is when to be instructional versus to be collaborative. And even worse, when some people aren't instructional, they're dictatorial.
Yep.
I'm telling you rather than instructing you or guiding you. But the reality is, for any good salesperson's the CEO of their territory, the CEO of their deal.
100%.
And they have to bring everybody else around them and allow those people who are great at what they do own those particular pieces of delivery. But then you need to be able to amend and direct around the edges and ensure everybody is pointed in the same direction.
Yep.
It isn't sometimes you need to modify, and not one person's got a much bigger expectation of what we should achieve versus another, and find a middle ground so that everybody can achieve the same thing at the same time. I think that's a real challenge for enterprise salespeople in particular. Business leaders. How do you give everybody a combined vision and keep it updated?
Yep.
Because it's not just the document that pops out once. To your point, it's not. You build that plan, and look. Anyone who's worked in sort of around the Salesforce ecosystem has heard of the concept of a V2 MOM, right?
Yep.
Vision, values. Let's see if I can remember it now. Vision, values, metrics, methods,
objectives.
Got no idea.
Yeah.
Objectives.
That's a case in point, right?
This is the point, right?
Yeah.
It has been a while since I used the V2 MOM, but it was a document you built once, and it never got referred back to. No. And I think in a sales team, like the most living plan, in my experience, is the forecast.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You look at it most often, it's there every single week. You're reminded what the annual number is. You're reminded what the next level down, whether it be quarter, month, week, day, whatever you're measuring. Mm-hmm. Like that's the living plan of a sales team. Like, what are your thoughts on that, Simon?
Look, it's an interesting one. I take you back to the V2 Mum days. I remember sitting in a room I think I was in Las Vegas, and Mark Benioff presented to the leadership team at Salesforce his particular V2 mum, and he had a way of doing it, and he walked us through it. And it made a lot of sense, and it was kind of nice as quite a few layers below Benioff I was, but just to see where he was thinking, where he's focused on, and then the CEO of Salesforce at the time, that was, I guess, one step below Mark, would then present his take on that for the sales business. And then each of us had to go and iterate on that. And then the role was I get back to Australia, and then I'd need to take my team through it, my leaders through it, and the leaders would take their AEs through it. I think that was a good exercise. I liked it because it ensured that from top to bottom, we're all kind of pointing in the same direction. But what I also liked about it was my plan was not Benioff's plan, and he didn't expect it to be. My plan was taking the piece of the business that I owned, putting my own personal touch, my style, my approach to achieve objectives that he wanted for the whole business. And I think that was a great process. But as you pointed out, it was what actually happened was it was a point in time plan. And we were every quarter told to go back and have a look at it. But in the cut and thrust of the year and hitting your numbers and updating your forecasts and your next steps, it kind of got put in the background a little bit. But I think at various points in the year, I would just go back and have a look at it. But its real power was at the beginning when you set it up, that you kind of knew that you're in alignment with the senior leadership of whichever business you're in. But it was interesting, I think, on our last podcast with Andrew Everingham, he worked at Salesforce years and years ago, started his own business, and one of the things he said is, he instituted that in his business because he found it profoundly useful. Now, I wonder whether it's, Andrew leading his business of 30, 40 people, as distinct from Salesforce, 60,000 plus employees. It probably has a much closer alignment for Andrew than it may do for a company the size of Salesforce in terms of ongoing. So you're a lot closer to the action in a smaller business.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it just goes back to that core concept of if you want everyone on the same page, there better be a page.
Yep. Absolutely.
But if the page is sitting in a drawer, maybe there's an extension to this. If the page is sitting in a drawer in the long term, there may as well not be a page.
Absolutely.
It's how do you live by it? Because the plans change.
Yep.
There's a famous quote. I'm pretty sure it's Muhammad Ali that said, everyone's got a plan to get punched in the face. It was either him or Tyson.
Yeah.
Everyone's got, and I think
it was Mike Tyson.
But within that, I mean, maybe it was Mike Tyson, right? And I'm actually reminded by the poster that's on the wall behind me. I can see in the camera.
Yeah.
I've see a lot of international sport, and everyone's got a strategy for the game against or the tournament and until they have their first injury or a player gets red carded, and okay, hold on, now all of a sudden we have to change what our tactics are. We need to adjust live, and you're now playing out of position, and there is a new plan.
Yep.
I think all of those things go into it, but you have to coordinate all those people around you. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to do it mid-cycle, mid-meeting. And I think this is where really good planning, whether it be for a new role you've got on or whether it be for an account, is, in the context of a sporting event, it's like being in a meeting. Mm-hmm. You can't turn to your boss or your colleagues halfway through a meeting when the customer throws you a curly and says, I thought we were all here to go and do a demo and you said we're doing a discovery.
Yep, exactly.
It's my meeting. I'm the customer. Open the tool up. Let's go.
Yeah. 100%.
How do you... And I think part of that then goes back to, well, realistically, the issue you've got and the lesson to learn there is either did we have a plan for how to deal with that? Mm-hmm. Did we have a plan as a team before we walked in? What if the customer says this?
Yep.
If I'm in my 30, 60, 90 for a brand new role, yes, I want to sit there. And I've had this in a previous role where I want to sit there for the first 30 days and learn. And I walked in and I went, I can't forecast properly with the information that I've got.
Yep.
I'm going to have to institute new rules like today.
Yes.
Because this doesn't work.
Yep.
And I think all of those things, you have to be ready to deal with, but it's got to be on your plan.
Yep, it does. And look, for me, it was download the pipeline. Do I actually understand what the deals are about? Can I forecast this?
Yep.
And that actually helps inform what I put in my 30-day plan.
Yeah.
Because I know my job is going to be judged on delivering a number, and it's going to be about bringing a team together to deliver that number. And if I see a whole bunch of pipeline there that I just don't trust or don't believe in or don't understand, it's my job to get across that and understand it.
Pull it apart. Yeah.
Yeah. And as you say, the plan changes. I mean, I know that there's a few cricket teams playing each other over in England right now, and they're in a 5-day meeting, and there's been a few curveballs, right? And the winner of those engagements has been the one that's been able to adapt and change. I think our English friends might want to complain about the plans changing throughout the game, but look at the scoreboard.
And that's the reality. I mean, it never surprises me, I should say, is how much there's a similarity between sport and sales.
Yep.
You planned that this demo was going to go, these phases were going to go a particular way, and it didn't. And it's the same as you thought that your particular batsman was going to be out there for another 3 hours, and he walked off the crease and from an underarm throw got taken out. You think it's unfair, except he's back in the sheds. So you can think it's unfair all you like. You can complain to the papers as much as you like.
Yep.
Guess what? He's still out and he's in the sheds. That meeting that you had where you thought it was a discovery became a demo, and you demoed the wrong stuff. Okay, what's the plan from here?
Yep.
How do you recover that?
Yep. And I think the other similarity to selling is, have you ever seen a silver medal awarded at the end of a deal cycle?
There is no second place. 100%. Yep. There is no second place in sales.
So adapting to change.
Close. We loved you guys. You're great people. We really love the team, but we've bought with somebody else.
Don't you love that conversation, Dan? Isn't it wonderful? You're really excited about your relationship with the key stakeholder. You've gone for dinners. You've done a great job, and he or she gives you a call and says, "Look, I really like you, Dan. You're an awesome person. You're by far the most likable, but we're not going with you."
Yeah, but I mean and you and I have been in that story a number of times.
A couple.
And I think this goes back to a thing as a salesperson where you actually have to understand another aspect of going back to, if whenever on the same page, there better be a page.
Yep.
The other piece out of that is when the customer tells you that, is there a page yet?
Yeah.
Does the other vendor, other party, have they got a signed contract?
Mm-hmm.
Because if
is
they
it really
haven't got
lost?
a signed contract, guess what? There's no common plan here yet. That's what a contract is.
Yeah, some of my best wins have been after I've been told I've been lost.
Yeah,
by far,
absolutely. Some of my best have included a plan where we wanted to get excluded. We actually wanted the customer to tell us that we weren't a fit for exactly what it was that they were trying to buy, because our opinion was they were trying to buy the wrong thing.
Yep.
And we needed to help blow the whole thing up in order to come back and build and get everybody on a new page.
Yeah, I remember. I know you blowing up RFP processes. I think it's one of your favourite pastimes.
I think it's the only way to win them.
Yep.
I think anyone who tries to just follow the bouncing ball in an RFP is just on the fast way to be commoditized, and longer term, it's a zero sum game.
Yep. Well, I remember us blowing up a forecast call once.
We've blown up a forecast call, exactly right.
First forecast call of the quarter. Simon, what's your number for the region? 0.
0.
That certainly got their attention. I may do it differently.
Again, but hey, I mean, using that in context, using that particular example in context, and look, we should get our good friend Mr. Kendra on the podcast at some point to talk about it.
Yep.
But look, it was about us saying to the business, and before we went in, we had a plan.
Yep.
We had a plan on a page as to what we're absolutely going to do.
Yep.
And we were solid on the reasons why we were doing it. We'd thought through what they were going to say. We'd thought through our answers to what they were going to say. We'd thought through the questions that came out of those answers.
Yep. And I did look on my
as a result of that, we got an outcome.
Yeah, I looked on my PC where I keep my CV as well, just to make sure I still had it, just in case it went pear-shaped.
But hey, we were prepared for the outcome. We knew what was going to happen.
Well, I think look, the big lesson in that for me, the big lesson in that for me was really, look, you know your business, and if you know your business really, really well, and you've got a plan, and you've thought it through, you've workshopped it, if you do something that's a little controversial, back yourself, because if you've got the best interests of the business at heart and your customers at heart, it's a really good logical conversation to have and a debate. And we were forecasting to somebody that was 12,000 miles away.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also as salespeople, we're always risk takers. So you don't have a job in sales if you're not a risk taker, right?
100%.
Because you live half your life with most of your salary at risk, if not all of your salary.
Yep.
So and you're always on the edge of, is it great? Is it not? And the better you get, the higher the expectations come from, your colleagues, the industry, your customers. As much as you're as good as your last deal, that's now the standard. Then the next deal is meant to be better again. And that just becomes what everybody wants from you as part of the course.
Yep. And
so,
by the way, next quarter you've got to sell all these new products.
I've never seen a quota go down.
Yep. I've never really seen a territory increase.
Right. Never seen a territory increase. Never seen a quota go down. Right. Yep. And that's because that's kind of how this game works. Because growth is a number that goes up. Mm-hmm. So I think that's back to these core pieces of, right, you've got a new role, you've got a new territory, you've got a new year. Hey, what's the plan?
100%. And I think the other big one I've seen go backwards and forwards over my time is the migration from industry-aligned salespeople to geographic. And every 2 or 3 years, it swaps and changes. And as a salesperson, you're not potentially in control of the conversation, but suddenly you've gone from being industry aligned. Let's say your focus is financial institutions, and the next year it's okay. Well, we've split this into geographies. You're now New South Wales, or you're now Victoria, or whatever. Yeah. You've got to rebuild your territory. You've got to rebuild your plan.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that, it just comes back to, sales is about constant change. You're either driving change because someone's going to buy a product from you to solve a problem they either know they had or didn't know they had, that you've created for them, helped create for them, or create acknowledgement from them.
Yep.
You've solved it for them, but in that is change. But you're also constantly changing in terms of what it is that you're delivering and doing. Your products change, your leader changes, your territory changes.
Yep.
Your customers are constantly changing. And it's becoming, I suppose the only thing that doesn't change in that is you as a constant, but even your experience and your knowledge changes. The way the tools you're going to use change. So
I've certainly changed over the years.
That's the one constant.
Yeah, I mean,
100%. Yeah,
less hair, but apart from that, I've changed the way I go about doing things. But it's
I've definitely got less hair, a little bit wider.
Yep, wiser.
Yep.
But it's interesting.
Wiser. I left the S out.
Yeah. It's interesting for me. I mean, I've had 2 journeys with 2 big software juggernauts, and I think the first one, SAP. It was when I first started. We sold ERP, and you had a couple of SKUs, but as the business was under pressure to grow, it acquired other businesses. It added new SKUs, and I think as I left SAP, there's probably over 1,000 SKUs that I had. Where when I first started, there were probably 4 or 5. And I think same thing happened at Salesforce. Yeah. I think the pressures on those big corporates to grow, they can't do it 100% organically, so they acquire businesses. And as a salesperson, you might enter a new year and there are another 10 SKUs that you need to learn.
Yeah, for sure. I think but again, that's part of how do you drive growth? I mean, going back to how do you build a plan and how you're going to work around it? I mean, the keys that I've seen companies look at, I'm either finding customers and selling to net new customers I haven't spoke to before. I'm going to sell more stuff to the same customers that I've got. I'm going to expand the current offerings. So if I've sold you one can of Coke, I'm going to sell you 2 cans of Coke, or I'm going to sell you Coke and Fanta, or I'm going to expand the value of what you're getting. So I used to sell you Coke, but now I'm going to sell beverages. Rather than a $1 Coke, I'm going to sell you a $10 bottle of wine. So I think they're really the options that you've got around. Or I'm going to sell you a whole bunch of consulting around the beverages you've already got to make it your enjoyment of the beverages even better.
Yep.
And like they're really how organizations grow what it is that they're doing.
Yep.
Or they're going to different geographies, which is just I'm just going to sell more cans of Coke.
And that, my friend, is why sales is
product or service is. That's what you do.
Yeah, I mean that is why sales is the best career. We certainly don't work in a sausage factory.
Yeah. No, and it changes every year. I mean, what you're going to do and achieve changes year by year, and the strategy for what the focus is. I mean, you can see it in any good sales team. You better see it inside the plan, which is your comp plan.
Yep.
We're going to pay you to achieve these outcomes. We're targeting these types of growth.
Yep.
I mean, those things I think become really important for you to really understand, what it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think obviously with the economy and the jitters around inflation and interest rates going up, companies are thinking more before they buy software. They don't, they're not making decisions as quickly. So you need to be more patient. And as a salesperson, you've got to be really in tune with the changes that are happening in your prospect or customer as well. I think the people you talk to.
Yep.
2-3 years ago that you would go through a discovery and a demo and you talk about the value and yes, tick the box, we're better than the other guys, you'll buy my software. Traditionally, great sales cycle that is, but these days it's, look, we really love the process, you really understand our business, the problems of ours, you're going to solve them, but I'm sorry, I can't make that decision just yet. Or, I was going to roll it out to all of the divisions, but I'm going to do a proof of concept. And I know that's your favorite way of selling software, Dan. Proof of concept, not.
I hate a proof of concept. But I think this goes back to what's the plan for that conversation. And we really should do a whole session on that discovery and that discovery process. But I think... whenever you get to a desire for a proof of concept, something's gone astray in your plan, in your conversation with a customer.
Yep.
Because it's either a really intentional part of what you're trying to achieve, because potentially you have to build the product.
Yep.
If you are genuinely building the product with them, then hey, proof of concept kind of makes sense.
Yep.
But if you've got a defined product and you've got to step to a proof of concept before the sale, something's gone astray here, which is either you don't understand why the customer's buying it, the customer doesn't understand why they're buying it, or they don't really understand the benefits of why they're buying it, but they think this could be a good idea.
Yep.
Which means earlier in the process, like there's something of this documentation or delineation of what it is what problem they're really solving.
Yep.
Hasn't been
qualified,
hasn't been made apparent and qualified. Well, qualified's not. Everyone uses this term qualified, right? And I think I've always thought it's the wrong term, because qualify back on my documentation says, are they ready to buy, or do they have the money to buy, or do they fit the type of customer that would benefit from our product or service?
Yep.
But that's actually not the problem when you're a customer. You could be the perfect fit, but if I haven't understood why it is I'm actually buying inside my company, that's what I've got to go and sell.
Yeah.
And
that's a form of qualification from the
challenges.
Form of qualification from the other side, right? The customer needs to qualify internally why they're looking for something.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, I think it's a real challenge for people to understand internally why it is I'm actually doing this and why I should buy this solution. They can see it's a good idea, but they can't document it for themselves so that they
Hmm.
can sell it internally.
Well,
I
they've got
think
to be able to
that's a
put up
real
with the
challenge.
change.
Yeah.
They've got to be ready
What's
for the
the change?
change.
Have they
Yeah.
documented those pieces?
It's
Yeah,
it that that's interesting.
absolutely.
I mean, we've both seen companies that have spent a fortune rolling out CRM, and a lot of that change
Yeah.
impacts, let's say, the sales teams, the sales leaders in the business, and the CFO signs
Mm.
off the check to buy that, and forces the change into the
Yep.
business. And then we've also sold software to CFOs, and when it's the CFO that needs to change, it's a completely radically different conversation. Most CFOs are happy to sign off a change that will grow revenue, and a lot of the impact of the change happens outside the finance organization. But selling software to the
Mm.
CFO that will impact their organization, it's a completely different conversation, and it's often a lot slower.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always slower selling to kind of the back office people than the front office people.
Hmm.
That's just a matter of the way that decision making is made in different parts of the business.
Yep.
But it goes back to understanding change, right?
Yep.
Do you understand how they think about change? Do you understand the types of change that they like to implement? Their capacity for change.
Hmm.
I mean, that's kind of another key lesson back within stepping into a new role, right?
Hmm.
You can have the best plan, you can be the best coach possible, but if your team aren't ready to take on the lessons, it's irrelevant whether you're ready to sell, whether you're ready to
Yep.
talk to them about it or not.
Yep. Exactly.
So yeah, for sure. So, mate, back to your new role. What I don't want to forecast and tell everybody what you're about to go and do, but what are the pieces that you're mindful of as you kind of step into the new role? And yes, you've got your 30, 60, 90
Mm.
components there, but you've had a number of new roles over your career
Yep.
within companies and changing. Like, what are the things you really watch out for and you're careful on?
Um, I guess with this one, I think number one, don't don't come in and be arrogant and piss people off. And I've done that
Yeah,
not knowingly before, so I'm very cognizant of where I am, and I'm not in charge of the region in this particular role, and so I've also got to be a little bit
mm,
cognizant about the way I hold myself. So I've got a boss locally. I've not worked for a boss that sits inside Australia for 15 years. So that's different, right?
yeah,
So I can't walk in and make unanimous changes to things because I'm the boss. I've got to go in and build a groundswell and be a little bit more humble, and that's actually a really good thing
mm,
for me. Other things that I've got to do is I've got to respect the background of a lot of different people that I've just never worked with before. Get a good understanding of what makes them
yeah,
tick, but also project a personality that's my own. So I'm not being subservient. I know what I'm doing. I'm good at what I'm doing. I'm
mm,
confident, but just don't overreach in terms of telling people what to do from day one. I think getting a sense of the other big change for me in this particular role is my team's quite geographically spread out. So I've got people in Perth, in Adelaide, New South Wales, in Victoria, New Zealand, Brisbane, etc.
yeah,
And
wow,
I guess a couple of the last jobs I've had, the vast majority of them probably sit in the office with me. So it's quite a different approach to getting to know them.
yep,
I think I'm going to have to do a bit more travel
yes,
and build one-to-one relationships. And I think as I mentioned earlier, that this company does 100% channel sales. So
yeah,
the nature of the type of salesperson I need to hire, the number one B2B sales guy that
yeah,
does direct deals may not be the right person in this because they might be too controlling, or they might not be
yeah,
willing to share as much information with their partners. And I think, for me, I think my days at SAP really taught me about working with partners. So that's going to come in handy. But, Salesforce was 100% direct. So it's just a different way of doing things. And I'm really actually quite excited about learning something completely different, but applying a lot of the skills and best practices I've learned through direct sales. And it's just different. So we'll see how it goes. I'm excited about it. They're nice people. I'm working in North Sydney. So for me personally, that's I don't have to cross the Harbour Bridge.
Nice and convenient.
Yeah, I can put my passport away. No, it's just it's a nice change of scenery. I worked in North Sydney for years, then in the city for years, overseas as well. But I think it's nice. But as I say, day 5, I'm exhausted.
I'm sure you are. Well, mate, look, we might sort of wrap things up there. It's been an end of a long week for both of us. But I think that's a good summary of what you've got ahead for yourself. But some good advice there for everybody in terms of, look, how do you go about handling change? And I think one of the skill sets that I think we really summarised here was, as salespeople, we're masters of change, and what we're typically masters of is helping others out their change. And it's again one of those old sayings of the cobbler's kids have the worst shoes. But understanding for ourselves that we've got to sometimes sell that change to ourselves internally, and do the same things that you would do with a customer for yourself. And make your business the recipient of that change that you're so good at delivering to others around you. Treat your own operations, your own career like you would, one of your customers, and the work and effort and the documentation you put in for them is got to be what you do for yourself.
100%, and it's confronting. I'm quite used to giving change to other people, but having that change thrust upon me, it's confronting, it's exciting, it's scary, it's new, which is great. It's awesome.
For sure, I'm excited. Well, Simon, mate, thanks for the conversation as always. I hope our listeners enjoyed that. And look, for all the listeners, look, do us a favour, jump on to whichever the platform you're listening or watching us on now. Click the subscribe button, click the thumb and give us a like. If you're listening to us, give us 5 stars, drop us a comment that you subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. And we do hope you join us next time for the next episode of GrowthPulse, the B2B podcast.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone.